Okay, now we're starting a series of videos on the Javelin position. It's one of the 21 position types in the full course on the Queen versus Rook endgame that you'll find at my website, queenversusrook.com. There are 21 different kinds of positions, a vocabulary, so to speak. Once you become familiar with these position types, playing the Queen versus Rook endgame becomes easy and natural. But I want to warn you, the Javelin differs from all the others. We have rosettes, diamonds, third-rank defenses, harassment defenses, absolute seventh extensions, and so on and so on. Basic patterns that once you get familiar with them, you convert one into another according to a systematic process until you end in Philidor's position and turn it into the win of the rook. But when the Javelin position appears on the board, you must win it by Javelin rules. You can't turn the Javelin position into one of the other kinds of position types. In particular, the Javelin position is the only one where the attacker wins without going through Philidor's position. So this is another endpoint position, and you have to know how to convert it in the very same way you have to know how to convert Philidor's position. So let's walk into the Javelin position. This is a good example of how it often evolves, and this is best play for white. So this illustrates that a lot of times white's quickest way to make progress is to aim straight for the Javelin position in the same way white will aim for Philidor's position. So the main problem is that the white king is very far from the black king. We already know it's going to take a lot of moves to converge. So white checks here. In general, it's a good idea for black to keep the king and rook so that they can be reunited quickly. So black doesn't go to the 8th rank, but stays on the 6th rank with the rook. Well, the queen's nice and close, so white may as well advance the king. Black naturally gets checking distance. White's walking in so as to make mate threats, so black begins giving check, and what white does is walk the king into the shadow of the queen. This is the Javelin position. It can occur at any distance from the edge of the board. It's always the Javelin position. And what you want to notice about this is black will always be on the move here because white has a direct mate threat right there. So if white's to move in this position, white just gives mate. Naturally, what black does is stop the mate by going there. If you're playing this position as the attacker and your opponent forgets to do this, don't get fancy, just give checkmate and go home. But from here, this is a distant defense, pure and simple. There's an entire section on distance defenses in the database. The basic strategy for winning is always the same. The white king is now close to the black king and is going to converge from this direction. The white queen wants to be somewhere over in this neighborhood, giving checks from this direction. It's a pincher movement that forces mate, forces the win of the rook, or forces the rook to return to the king into a close defense on the edge of the board. So to start the process, white just checks here. King moves over, and now white checks here, and what I want you to notice is this set of squares. In the course, I call this the orbit of the rook. The queen really likes to check from the orbit of the rook, that is, from the next diagonal over from the rook that's of the same color. The reason is that checking from here gives access to a lot of forking squares. So as you can see, the queen can fork from right here. If the king moves to this square, well, the rook is lost to a fork. But the queen also has this forking square, and if the king can advance, the queen will also have this forking square. So checking from the orbit of the rook gives access to a lot of forking squares, and learning to play the forking squares is what this position is all about. Well, black doesn't fall for it. Black continues to maintain a distant defense by keeping the king and rook at opposite sides of the board, but where they can be easily reunited. So white continues converging. Now you do have to beware of something here. When you're advancing, don't advance that way, because black can now gain space, get the king off the edge of the board, simply by checking there, over there, and now all of a sudden we've got a third rank defense. Oops. White just lost a lot of time, and this can easily turn into a harassment defense from this point. Instead of that, go ahead and advance this way. Notice that what makes this safe is that the queen is controlling this checking square. Black can't just give check. So instead, what black may choose to do is to go this way. If black responds by bringing the rook in and giving check, again, don't get fancy, because black just made a big mistake. Check there, and black is about 3 moves away from mate. There's just no good way to stop the mate happening here without sacrificing the rook. So it's actually better for black to maintain the distant defense, come over here, and now what we see a lot of the time is that when the king has moved sufficiently close to this edge of the board, the queen shifts and attacks from this angle, driving the king toward the corner. That is the key move. If black comes up this way, we have an easy check there, again on the orbit of the rook. Got a forking square there. We've got a forking square there. This one traps the king that way. This one traps the king that way. If black moves forward, you see what's happening. The access to forking squares is just killing black. Okay. So black instead, from this check, comes here, and again, look at the access to forking squares. Black really only has one available good move here, which is to go there. And again, look at the access to forking squares. Black pretty much has to go there. And now, again, look at the access to forking squares. That's the only safe move. And now that the white queen finally has this checking square under control, move the king into attacking position. Notice again, in this layout, white's threatening a mate in 1 on that square, because the king is controlling this flight square. Always watch for that microwave mate position. Well, if black tries to return the rook, it's just mate. So black has to move the king. King goes there. White checks there. Notice the forking square. Black has no choice but to fall back here. And now comes the final trick that it seems that very few players, even the strongest, have ever discovered before this program was developed: the triple threat. The right thing to do when you've reached this position, the king and the rook are at opposite ends, pretty much in the middle of the board, more or less. You can swing a little bit north or a little bit south here, and the same principles apply. The attacking king is right there. When you've reached this position, the queen doesn't give check. Instead, the queen falls right here, and I call this the triple threat. First off, the queen's attacking the rook. The rook's pretty much got to move or it's lost, but the queen again is threatening this microwave mate. So on the one hand, black has to move the rook, but on the other hand, black has to stop this mate threat. And black can't do what happened before, swinging the rook here, because it just gets taken by the queen. The only option left is for black to check that king, but then the king comes here. This square is controlled, and now white has opened up the third mate threat. Two mate threats, one on each side of the board. Black's dead. There's no way to prevent mate or loss of the rook.